Welcome back to the channel, everybody. It is Thursday, October the 15th. We are officially 19 days away now from Election Day, but this is because we did our presidential election video yesterday. I don't like to put out two videos on the same day. We're going to make this officially our 20-day Senate election prediction video. And the reason I'm doing the Senate one day later is because in all likelihood, the Senate races quite a few of them may not be called until the very next day because we have some on the West Coast that are very swingy and might take a few extra hours to call, whereas some of the states on the West Coast in general on the presidential level are not that hard to call. Like, for example, it's not going to take more than just a couple minutes, really, or even a few moments to call the state of California, whereas the state of Arizona on the Senate level may very well actually have some swing factor to it. We may not really know where it ends up. So that's why we're going to come out with the Senate election prediction video today with 19 days remaining. So there you see the current Senate map, 35 Democrats and 30 Republicans. Control for the Senate is very much up for grabs. There are a number of vulnerable Republican seats that are being challenged pretty aggressively by the Democrats. They have fielded a number of very strong candidates that could indeed end up flipping some of these previously held GOP seats. So let's get right into it. First of all, in the state of Alaska, this state is pretty competitive, folks. Only today has it come out two polls in Alaska that have Al Gross right there with Dan Sullivan. Now, it was a recurring poll, so you can sort of think of it as one poll, and the results were basically the exact same. Like, it was either an exact tie or it had Al Gross actually leading by 1 percentage point. Now, we were waiting for a long time on some more data from this race because we didn't know exactly where this stood. We some time ago had the only data we had were really just two polls, one of which had the two candidates, of course, Dan Sullivan being the incumbent GOP senator and the challenger Al Gross. That poll first had Dan Sullivan up by 5 points, and then the next one had the two of them tied. This one, as I said a minute ago, had them basically tied again. So clearly, with such little information, it's a very difficult state to poll, as we know. It's pretty clearly a competitive race, all things considered. And Al Gross has a chance out here. Okay, he's raised quite a bit of money for a state where not that much money is really poured into this state. Usually, it's not considered a swing state, although it's often considered a competitive race, because by and large, this is a state that both parties do consider one that they can win. The Democrats have had success here in the past, not just with independents, but Mark Begich, of course, who was a moderate Democrat, was able to get himself elected here. And then, of course, Republicans have also had success here. It generally leans towards the right and does have a conservative tilt to it. And, of course, independents that generally caucus with the Republicans also have success in this state. So right now, because this state does have an identity at the end of the day, I'm only going to be able to label this a tilt because of that poll that we just saw today. So pretty clearly, Al Gross has a chance to win this state. And the mere fact that I think the GOP has reason to worry about this state is all the more reason to just be terrified if you're the Republican Party right now. I mean, the Senate is up for grabs. Alaska is in play. Dan Sullivan might win this race. Or, I'm sorry, Al Gross might win this race. Dan Sullivan might lose it. And, Dan Sullivan, as we've talked about on this channel before, is not really somebody that is considered that well known as senator. He's not that popular. He's also not really that unpopular, all things considered. But by and large, he's sort of an inconsequential guy, and that doesn't really help his status as an incumbent because Al Gross can sort of step in there and generate some enthusiasm, and with the fundraising that he's generated, it pretty clearly has shifted. And so right now, the Democrats are the ones that have the momentum in this state. Not saying it's going to be competitive really on the presidential level. It might also be a little bit on the House level. But on the Senate level, Al Gross has a chance here. In the state of Oregon, it's going to be a safe Democratic state. As we know, Jeff Merkley is going to be just fine. Paula Jordan is running for Senate up here in Idaho. She is someone the Democratic Party has been excited about for a while now. But that doesn't really mean that she is any sort of quote unquote rising star, nationally or locally in Idaho, of course. And as we know, she has no chance to defeat Jim Risch. At the end of the day, it is Idaho. In the state of Arizona, this has been one of the states the Democratic Party has thought they can win, really throughout the whole campaign season. And the reason being, Martha McSally is just such a disliked incumbent senator. She, of course, lost, 2 years ago, to Kirsten Sinema, an openly bisexual woman. And I don't think if, in 2016, if you said in 2 years, the Democrats will field a bisexual woman to challenge Martha McSally in the state of Arizona, you'd say, yeah, she's probably not going to win. I mean, this is still, at the end of the day, it's a safe state, or maybe not safe, but it's a likely red state. And, I don't think a bisexual woman is, necessarily moderate enough in that sense to be able to defeat a Republican. Well, she did, and she won by a couple points as well. And then suddenly Doug Ducey, when we had that open seat come up, they kind of committed political suicide, if you ask me, and appointed Martha McSally to that very seat. And so as a result, now she is the one that's defending herself, trying to get her first full term. Only it's against Mark Kelly, the former astronaut, the veteran, the husband of Gabrielle Giffords, and throughout the campaign season, really for about 200 days, we've seen pretty consistently there being a pretty consistent polling edge for Mark Kelly, and we've seen through and through on the presidential level, we've seen the Democratic Party have the edge through and through in this state. And we've seen over the years just how, the GOP has struggled in this state to maintain a certain lead. And that is why, at the end of the day, we can expect, I think, because of the polling that we've seen and because of the unpopularity of Martha McSally, we can expect Mark Kelly to win this race. And that's why, at the end of the day, I know it's kind of a long-winded explanation here, but I'm going to label this likely for the Democrats. Now, in the state of Montana, boy, there is a lot to unpack here, isn't there? There are 4 different things happening in this state. Okay, we have so much happening in this state, and it's very, very difficult to break all of it down really in one video. But the reality of the situation is there is a competitive gubernatorial race, a competitive House race, and a competitive Senate race all happening here, in addition to it being a mildly competitive state on the presidential level. And the reason for that is, in the state of Montana, we've seen a couple stories now about how voters in the state are absolutely burned out. Just by all the campaigning. I mean, so many emails and flyers and door knockers and television ads. And I mean, you can imagine in a state where you're electing a governor, the lone House member, a senator, and a president, there's going to be quite a bit of advertising happening here and quite a bit of fundraising going on between all parties involved. And that, the reason that we're seeing, I think, potentially low voter registration totals is because I think voters in this state are just kind of burnt out by the whole thing. But let's break it down. First of all, on the House level, this is being run by between Matt Rosendale and Kathleen Williams. Kathleen Williams, a Democrat, currently has a small lead over Matt Rosendale, who, as we know, has run for office, like half a dozen times now, and most recently unsuccessfully ran against Jon Tester 2 years ago. So what's interesting, though, is that, Greg Gianforte is the current House member of the state. And Greg Gianforte is running for governor against Mike Cooney, who is the lieutenant governor of the state. So you would think if the current House member is relinquishing his seat and the opposite party is on track to win that seat, you would think that in the gubernatorial race, that same person would be struggling to win, right? But he's not. He's actually ahead of Mike Cooney and has been ahead of him throughout the campaign season. Remember, there has not been a Republican governor in the state of Montana in 20 years, which is quite a statement. And to this point, it looks like Mike Cooney is going to be able to, or rather, Greg Gianforte is going to be able to outlast Mike Cooney in this state. So all of that is to kind of set it up because Steve Bullock, of course, is the current governor of the state of Montana, and he is in a dead heat practically with Steve Daines, the incumbent GOP senator. At the end of the day, this is a state where, in Montana, I think Democrats have reason to be optimistic because what we've seen time and time again is the Democratic Party can have success in this state with moderate candidates, number one, and in Democratic wave years, even though, they've been able to reelect some of their representatives and senators in years where they haven't necessarily been in Democratic wave years. But this is the kind of year that they have a real chance to win in a state like Montana. And right now, Steve Bullock got out to an early lead against Steve Daines after announcing his candidacy. Remember, he basically announced his candidacy within minutes of the filing deadline, and he took the early lead. He won the first poll by about 7 points, but it's been pretty much downhill from there for Steve Bullock. He won the first one by about 7 points, as I said, and then after that, he won one by about 4 points, and then Steve Daines took the lead. And the most recent Emerson poll, even though we have seen evidence recently that Emerson polls typically lean rightward, the most recent Emerson poll had Steve Daines, the incumbent, leading by 9%. So clearly there's a tilt here. Although, was it today or yesterday? I can't exactly remember, but Steve Bullock actually retook the lead in one poll by 2 points. So this is a dead heat, okay? And we just don't know exactly who indeed is leading in this state. It's very back and forth. And I think what you are beginning to see is the Democratic Party throughout this election season has felt they can win in this state, in this Senate race, because this was not necessarily originally one of the states that was sort of in their core pickup opportunities, and then it became one once the amount of money that suddenly got poured into this state. We suddenly saw that come in at such record numbers. But the GOP pretty quickly saw the danger here, and they reserved over $10 million, which is an astronomical number for a state that doesn't typically see nearly that much money, even in statewide races. So the Democratic Party has been incredibly bullish on this because Steve Bullock is such a popular figure. The Lincoln Project has been involved. They've taken out very popular ads. Right now, I still think Steve Daines has a slight edge. This is going to be very close. I expect Steve Bullock to get no less than 48% of the vote. He is a very liked figure in this state. It's a Democratic wave year, and again, with only 19 days left, he just won a poll by 2 points, okay? It's going to be a nail-biter for him. As I said, no less than 2 points from 50%, but I still think Steve Daines is going to pull it out. In Wyoming, there's nothing to talk about. Now, in Colorado, this was sort of, along with Arizona, one of the states that the Democrats knew they could pick up from day one. And the reason being, the Democratic Party thinks that in Arizona and in Colorado, this is the portion of the country that they are in the best position to win in. This is the changing demographics portion of the country. More people are moving towards the south from the north. In fact, Maricopa County in Arizona, which of course is where Phoenix is the fastest growing municipal area in the United States of America. And that counts for something. It means that there's a steady demographic change that is only going to benefit the Democrats. We know that where more and more and more people are concentrated, that generally benefits the Democratic Party, and where turnout is high, that benefits the Democratic Party. And furthermore, in this state, it's, for the last, 10 years, 12 years, it has shifted to the left. We know this. Okay, Barack Obama was able to win this state in 2008, and that was kind of the last time that Colorado was really thought of as a quote-unquote true swing state. I know it's still labeled that by 538 and indeed by 270, the mobile game as well. Most prognosticators and evaluators label this a swing state, along with New Mexico, actually. I can see why they do that, but at the end of the day, no. It definitely leans a certain way. And John Hickenlooper, who briefly ran for president after relinquishing his gubernatorial seat, they were able to replace him. The Democratic Party was with Jared Polis, the country's first openly gay governor. And so when you're able to replace, I've talked about this on the channel before, when you are able to replace an outgoing incumbent with a member of the same party, you're doing pretty well as a party. That is indicative of having a very, very good overall standing nationwide. So I expect John Hickenlooper, because of his strong, steady polling lead over Cory Gardner, who has been labeled by Democratic groups and by some of the ads we've seen from Hickenlooper's campaign as a little bit of a Trump stooge. At the end of the day, he has voted with Donald Trump over 90% of the time. So that pretty much solidifies this for me. I'm also going to label this likely. Again, we can't label these states safe because of the incumbency advantage, but Cory Gardner is probably, along with Martha McSally, the most vulnerable GOP incumbent. In the state of New Mexico, this is an open seat, but at the end of the day, even though this is also, like Colorado, labeled a swing state, we don't really have to consider it that way. Ben Ray Lujan is going to win this race. I would imagine about 12, 14 points. So I think at the end of the day, that's going to be fine for them. The South Dakota race, I think the Democrats are a little disappointed here, because this is a state that if they can nominate and field a very strong candidate who's moderate and really just does his job well, sometimes they can have a chance in this state. The gubernatorial race, I believe Bill Sutton was the candidate's name, got 47% of the vote. And of course, Tim Johnson was someone who represented, this state in the Senate for many years as well. So the Democratic Party, can get some stuff done in this state, but they just didn't do that this time. Mike Rounds is going to be fine, as will Ben Sasse. Now in Kansas, it is worth mentioning this race, because I do think it's getting a little too much buzz out there. Roger Marshall and Barbara Bollier are duking this one out. The GOP dodged a bullet when they did manage to not nominate and defeat in the primary Chris Kobach, who for a time there looked like he was going to be the GOP nominee for that Senate seat. He, of course, was very embattled in a lot of controversy and lost the gubernatorial race to Laura Kelly, a Democrat, 2 years ago in a very surprise move. Again, that was one of 7 governorships that flipped from red to blue in 2018. The others being Nevada, off the top of my head here. Let's see, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, Maine, and New Mexico. So there were plenty out there, and it was just kind of a matter of which state was going to generate the most enthusiasm for all parties involved. So for the Democrats, I think there's reason to be somewhat interested in this race. We do know a bunch of money has been spent here. Barbara Bollier does have a contingent of voters that like her very much. She's a former Republican, a moderate, as we know. She has the endorsement of Laura Kelly, who of course it was well liked enough by Kansas voters to elect her at the end of the day. So clearly there's some consistency going on here, and I think that Democratic voters ought to feel encouraged by the potential future ramifications of what a Laura Kelly win 2 years ago might mean for this state, but it does not mean that Barbara Bollier is going to win. I think that this is going to be a likelihood characterization. I'm going to label it likely. Jim Inhofe is going to be fine in Oklahoma. Now in Texas, this race has gotten a little more interesting in the last 2 weeks. For most of the campaign season, this was seen as a competitive race and a real race, but not really one that either side was, not one that the Republican Party was too concerned about, and not one that the Democratic Party was overly optimistic about. At the end of the day, this is not 2 years ago when it was Beto O'Rourke against Ted Cruz. And, yes, we do know that eventually the state of Texas will go blue, but it just didn't really seem like it was going to happen in this Senate election. And MJ Hager, as well as she has done with the fundraising, and she had that extremely popular campaign ad, I believe it was entitled Doors, that went viral. That it's just not really enough in this case. John Cornyn, while not very popular, just isn't as unpopular as Ted Cruz. But the reason I said it changed just a little bit is because MJ Hager has seen a very, very sharp increase in fundraising over the last little bit here. And polling has shown that she is close. I mean, she is within, 5 to 7 points, meaning if something just kind of goes awry, then she might actually have a chance to win this race. And that, that goes for saying something. I mean, I think the DSCC believes that this is a race worth watching, and a race that if John Cornyn were to just kind of make a little bit of a mistake on the campaign trail and MJ Hager ran a flawless campaign and out fundraised the Cornyn campaign, then maybe, just maybe, she could somehow pull off a stunning upset. But look, I mean, let's be honest. If Texas is going to go blue for the first time, would it really be this race? Would it really be MJ Hager defeating John Cornyn? I can't see it unfolding this way. And so we're going to make this a margin characterization. We're going to label it lean. But at the end of the day, again, I do think MJ Hager will get 45%, and I think she might get over that. I think she might get 46, maybe 47%. And that, again, is a testament to the fact that this state is changing. But I just do not expect this to be the race that finally pushes Texas over the top for the Democratic Party. And I think that the GOP will survive here. Okay, now in Minnesota, this was a state that the GOP was very confident in. In fact, Trump altogether predicted that he was going to win this state just the other day. He's wrong completely. Doesn't take a genius to see that. Now, of course, he only lost the state by 1.5% 4 years ago. And so since then, I mean, he has felt and his campaign has felt that they have a chance to win this state, that they can consider it very competitive. But in 2018, we kind of saw the end of that pipe dream for the Republicans. There were 3 statewide races in those midterms. The Democrats swept them. Tim Walz, Amy Klobuchar, and Tina Smith all won their races and all won them rather comfortably as well. And there's no polling or any kind of data of any kind to really suggest that the Republicans or the Democrats are in any kind of danger of losing one of those races again this time. Tina Smith is fighting for her first full term as a U.S. Senator. But yeah, again, at the end of the day, there's no reason to really believe that the Democrats are in any kind of pressure here. Tina Smith, I mean, it's the kind of race where she does have to run a very serious campaign and she does need to accrue some donations and everything, but it's just not, really close enough on any level. The polling has been consistent for her, and at the end of the day, she's going to be fine. I'm going to label it safe. Okay, in the state of Iowa, this one has steadily shifted over the course of the campaign season. It's a very interesting state, a very elastic state with a lot of moving parts to it. Theresa Greenfield is currently leading Joni Ernst. Joni Ernst, a longtime establishment incumbent Republican, as we know. She's been around. I mean, she's kind of gone through it, over time in this state. And as we know, was this back, I believe, in 2014, she had that famous "Let's Make Them Squeal" ad. And that sort of solidified her as this kind of rising star within the party. And since then, she's really faded from public view. Charles Grassley, of course, has maintained his status as the far more popular and well-known GOP senator from this state. However, there are three of the 4 House members in this state are Democrats. And of course, the one that is controlled by the GOP was the one that Steve King had for ages up here in the northwest portion of the state. So recently, Theresa Greenfield has definitely taken the upper hand in fundraising. And Joni Ernst, she knows it. She has... so I don't want to say she's desperate, but she has definitely kind of picked it up as far as, some of the rhetoric and just some of the messaging goes. Like, she's definitely trying very hard, kind of pulling out all the stops to get this thing turned around inside this last tiny bit of campaigning. She's losing, and Theresa Greenfield definitely has the upper hand, and as a result, I think Theresa Greenfield is going to win this race, and that is a crucial flip for the Democratic Party. It's one that they had pointed to for a long time as the one that they think they can win and help improve their Senate flip chances. The state of Arkansas, the Democrats don't even have a candidate, and in Louisiana, they only recently came up with one altogether. Now, in the state of Mississippi, this is a state that you can expect to be a little closer than I think people are giving it credit for. This is the highest minority population state in the United States. As we know, turnout's going to be high among that community in this election. Mike Espy is giving it another shot against Cindy Hyde-Smith. Now, they ran in that special election a few years back, and Mike Espy came up short. It was about 54 to 46, and of course then Cindy Hyde-Smith, was kind of enshrined in some controversy over some racially tone-deaf comments. But the polling, of which there hasn't been a whole lot, and the fact that it's still Mississippi at the end of the day doesn't really suggest Mike Espy can pull this thing out. I mean, it's Mississippi, okay? At the end of the day, it kind of has that identity. And so at the end of the day, I'm still going to label this safe, just more of a likelihood characterization than a final margin. Definitely expect Mike Espy to get over 40%. Alabama, look, Doug Jones, I think there was I think he was justified in believing he could still survive in this state once Tommy Tuberville won. the primary, just because, maybe they could just, appeal to enough people and saying, look, Tommy Tuberville is a football coach. He is not a politician. He doesn't know what he's doing. But that just hasn't happened. Tommy Tuberville consistently leads by double digits, and I'm going to break my own rule here and label this a safe seat, even for the challenging party. Now, we have 2 races in Georgia, both of which are competitive. That is obviously a major difference from earlier characterizations on this channel. So let's first break down the general election. This is being run, of course, between Jon Ossoff and David Perdue. Jon Ossoff was at the center of the most expensive House race in U.S. history real early on in Trump's term. He lost. The Democrats were a little disappointed when it became known that he was going to be their nominee for this seat, because this race kind of screamed for like a young progressive, preferably African American candidate, and that's not Jon Ossoff, as we know. Now, he may be young and relatively progressive, but he's obviously not black. Now, he's been polling okay against David Perdue. Purdue's surviving. Most of the polls have Perdue leading by 4 to 5 points, whereas the ones we see Jon Ossoff leading consistently have him only ahead by 1 to 2 points, well within the margin of error. So Perdue has the edge. If Jon Ossoff were to win, would I be terribly surprised? No, but I'd say I'd be a little surprised. I mean, I don't think there's been too much. Now, I will say David Perdue did make a big mistake when he did share an image appearing to show Jon Ossoff's nose being elongated. Now, obviously, to my Jewish friends, I myself am Jewish, and that doesn't take a genius to know that is relatively anti-Semitic. So that could be, campaign fuel of sorts for Jon Ossoff. Who knows if that's really going to make a difference? That was also quite a long time ago now. I believe that was over 100 days ago. So that's probably not that significant, all things considered. So I'm going to label this lean GOP. Now, in the special race, this thing changed. This was the jungle primary, and for the longest time on this channel, I had this characterized as safe Republican, because I was convinced that the runoff that we were going to see in January was just going to be between 2 Republicans. I certainly thought it was going to be just between Doug Collins and Kelly Loeffler. Well, suddenly Raphael Warnock, who was the leading Democrat in this race for the longest time, he has just surged into the lead in this race. And even though the lead can be a little misleading, because sometimes if you're in first place in the jungle primary, the second place party, will usually just have 2 candidates that make up a far bigger percentage of the vote than what the first place candidate is leading by. And we've seen a couple polls like that where Warnock is leading, with 41% or something like that. And then Kelly Loeffler and Doug Collins, comprise, I don't know, maybe 70%. Now, do we expect, let's say it's Doug Collins versus Raphael Warnock, is Doug Collins going to get 70%? Absolutely not. But I would still this is a big change in characterization. We had this as safe Republican. I'm only able to also label this lean now, because Raphael Warnock, if you suddenly match him up one-on-one with whether it's Doug Collins or Kelly Loeffler, he might, really pose a real test, because Barack Obama, of course, recently endorsed him, and there are increasing calls from Matt Lieberman to drop out of the race, which would sort of help consolidate the Democratic support around Raphael Warnock. Now, in the state of Tennessee, this has become a safe GOP state, as we know. We're kind of long past now the days of Al Gore, right, and Phil Bredesen. It's become, a safe GOP bastion, and it really will remain that for quite some time, I imagine. Now, South Carolina, this has obviously become such an interesting race. Look, for a while, this was pretty similar to the race in Kentucky. It's a super, super big establishment Republican incumbent who's being challenged by, sort of this upstart young candidate who a lot of people like and brings about a ton of energy. But look, I mean, a lot of the energy is kind of due to the fact that that candidate is running against either Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham in the first place. And so that, is sort of a built-in advantage for that challenger. And we kind of saw that in this case for Jamie Harrison. But very early on, we started seeing those just absolutely gargantuan fundraising totals. And in the third quarter alone, Jamie Harrison's campaign raised around $60 million, which shattered the record previously set by Beto O'Rourke only 2 years ago. So it's pretty clear, where voters, across the Democratic voters across the country, where they feel the priorities should be. And it's in this state, no doubt. And the polling has, been so close in recent weeks that Cook Political Report labeled it a toss-up. Now, Lindsey Graham can breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief because there were two polls released yesterday. One of them had him up by 6 points, and another had Jamie Harrison leading by 1 point. Now, Jamie Harrison, as we know, has 19 days to absolutely blanket the state of South Carolina with ads. Of course, look, we just got to be honest. It's no secret that Lindsey Graham walked back his word, okay? I mean, that's not a political statement. He said, if there is a vacancy during the first year of Trump's term, you can use my words against me. He did say that. And now, of course, he's doing the opposite. Now, am I saying that a Democrat wouldn't do that? No, I'm not saying that. I don't know. But there's no secret. It's no secret that is going to be pretty good campaign fuel for Jamie Harrison. I mean, as it should be. And so he has 19 more days to spend this just absolutely absurd amount of cash on hand that he has and just kind of continue to blow Lindsey Graham away. Remember, Lindsey Graham recently had to go on Fox News and essentially beg for help. That's never a good sign. So I'm going to label this lean instead of tilt. And the only reason I'm going to do that is because at the end of the day, it is South Carolina. And that poll did show Lindsey Graham still having, just barely the upper hand here, I think. And that pretty much, to me, I think that's just a sigh of relief where Lindsey Graham can sleep better at night knowing that at the end of the day, this is South Carolina. Jamie Harrison basically has to have a perfect election night for this to go his way, which, it could happen. I will say this, 6 weeks ago, this was not a race that I really thought Jamie Harrison had a chance to win. It was basically a state that, he could force the GOP. He had run a good enough campaign and was a strong enough candidate to where he could force the Republican Party to spend a lot of money here and in turn weaken their chances elsewhere. Now, he definitely has a chance of losing to Jamie Harrison. It's just not quite as big as I think some in the media are making it out to be. Now, in North Carolina, obviously, this was a state that had been firmly in the grasp of Cal Cunningham, the Democratic challenger, for weeks on end. He had consistently led throughout the campaign season. And throughout the season, there had basically been 4 states that you could point to and sort of say these are the core 4, if you will, that the Democrats think they can flip. Those, to me, were being Arizona, Colorado, North Carolina, and Maine. Now, I think you can sort of throw Iowa in there, and then after that, it was sort of, okay, maybe Montana, and then potentially one of these long shot races, whether that be Georgia, even though I don't call that big a long shot, and, South Carolina and the rest of them. So the point being here, Cal Cunningham was in very good shape until the whole thing with the sexting scandal. Now, was it really a sext? I don't know. See for yourself. We're not really going to get into all that, but it was not obviously helpful to his campaign. Now, some have gone as far to say that it, is not really hurting his chances. We've seen some stories in Politico and other publications that have interviewed voters and potential voters. When I say voters, some people who have already voted early who have said, it doesn't affect my vote, or I've already supported him and I'll continue to support, things like that. Well, the polling has shrunk a little bit. We saw a lot of double-digit wins for Cal Cunningham over the last 3 months. The polls that have come out after that whole story surfaced have him ahead by 5 points and by 6 points. Now, obviously, if it were me, I would rather be Cal Cunningham right now than Thom Tillis. And of course, Thom Tillis did himself no favors. I'm not blaming this on him, but he did himself no favors when he contracted COVID-19. So that has sort of in turn compromised his ability to campaign through this last little stretch. There was also some speculation that Tillis would be one of the GOP senators who would be a little hesitant and maybe a little pushbacky on the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, at least for the time being in some of the hearings, just to boost his chances. But so far, we have not seen any evidence of that. And so I think all in all, it's pretty clear that I think Cal Cunningham still has the upper hand here. And I also think that the incumbency and reelection of Roy Cooper, a very popular Democratic governor, is going to help Cal Cunningham in this race. He doesn't, I mean, I think Cunningham has a little bit bigger margin for error right now than Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis, to me, is sort of fighting for dear life right now. Whereas I think Cal Cunningham is still in the driver's seat, and that I think he had built up a big enough lead to where he could survive that sexting scandal. So I'm only going to label this tilt. I think it's going to be closer than people think because people have been so accustomed to Cunningham having a very, very strong lead throughout the campaign season. I think people are expecting Cunningham to really wipe this one out. But I think due to the fact that this is still North Carolina, a state that is not, exactly friendly to Democrats, that much, I think that combined with this scandal is going to make it difficult for Cal Cunningham to really pull away, and it's not going to be a state that we definitely call right away on election night either. Now, in the state of, let's go over here to Illinois first. Dick Durbin's going to be fine. We know that. He's not really facing a serious reelection. It's not, too competitive a state either. In the state of Kentucky, Amy McGrath was just never really able to do the same thing that Jamie Harrison was able to do. She raised a ton of money, as we know, but it just wasn't really the same. She's going up against such an incumbent who's just kind of immovable in Mitch McConnell. I'm going to label this safe. I do think Amy McGrath will get 40%, but yeah, whatever. West Virginia, also a safe Republican state, just as I think Mark Warner will be fine in Virginia. Now, in Michigan, the Democratic Party has shown some signs and has admitted that they're a little concerned about this race. Gary Peters is the incumbent Democratic senator who's being challenged by John James, who, of course, ran unsuccessfully 2 years ago against Debbie Stabenow. Now, look, Michigan is still, even though it typically leans to the left a little bit, even though it went for Donald Trump 4 years ago, it is a state that, look, it's never going to be a safe Democratic state. It's never even going to be a likely Democratic state. It's a little swingy. And, John James is, by most accounts, a pretty strong candidate. He's a black candidate that's, there aren't that many of those for the Republican Party. Now, he did suffer a little bit of a blow when he wasn't able to speak at the RNC because of everything that went virtual, as we know, and any boost he was going to get from the Trump campaign has been dashed as they have pulled all their ads out of the state, as we know, because they're essentially out of money, the Trump campaign, all of a sudden. So far, Gary Peters is hanging on. Earlier on, about 6-8 weeks ago, he was winning polls easily, 10, 12 points a pop. Now it's definitely narrowed up. He's within the margin of error. Now, I still think that at the end of the day, I can't really see Gary Peters going down in this race. This is a big Democratic wave year. And I just don't think there's anything that Gary Peters has or hasn't done that is too repulsive to voters. In a way, he's kind of similar to Dan Sullivan. Right? Like, there's a challenging candidate. It is a serious race, and there have been some concerning polls for him, but it's just not enough, I think, to really move the needle. And again, in a Democratic wave year especially, I just can't see Gary Peters losing. I'm going to label this lean a downgrade from likely. Okay, now we do want to give the VP nod. This is another malfunction on this site that we're still working to fix here. The VP nod is still going to go blue because, as we know, and as you've seen on our presidential election prediction videos, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have the edge there. In Delaware, Chris Coons is going to win re-election, as will Cory Booker, as will Jack Reed. And now, upon knowing as of September who the candidate is in Massachusetts, Ed Markey will hang on for this seat. Now, Jeanne Shaheen was potentially in for a competitive re-election here. This is another state where if you field a really good candidate, if you're the GOP, you can potentially win. But that just hasn't really happened this time. The GOP, if it's Kelly Ayotte or someone like that, it's just not going to be enough. And Kelly Ayotte, of course, is the candidate in this race for the Republicans. Jeanne Shaheen is by far, though, the more popular of these two senators. Remember, this was the closest race out of all 50 states in the 2016 election. And Maggie Hassan, who's up for re-election in 2 years and could potentially be in for a tough one, she, only won about like 2,000 votes or something. It really couldn't get any closer than that. But Jeanne Shaheen's going to be fine. I'm going to label this safe. Now, in Maine, Susan Collins has hung in there. Okay, this was basically the first state that the Democratic Party pointed to after 2016 as a potential pickup opportunity because Susan Collins has been around a long time, and I think that they felt if they raised enough money, they could really boost a candidate here and get someone reelected. And then once, we had seen a couple things where Susan Collins had sort of not lived up to this idea that she was this bipartisan senator. And then I think her real undoing, if she indeed loses, which is not, a done deal yet, was when she voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. That was not helpful for her. Her approval ratings plummeted, as we know, and of course Sarah Gideon has outraised her, and she was just never able, though, Sarah Gideon, to really get that poll that showed her up by 11, up by 9, up by something like that. She was constantly up by 3, by 4, and we keep waiting for her. The Democratic Party was, and when I say we, I just mean people watching this from the outside. We're kind of waiting to see that breakthrough. And that kind of happened today. There was a poll release that had her up by 7 points. I think Susan Collins is going to lose this race. I think Sarah Gideon is going to be able to hang on. It'll be close. I think the Joe Lieberman endorsement of Susan Collins is helpful for her. But I think what we're seeing is like Jared Golden, the Democrat who has who's the House member from that district up in the northern portion of the state, which is a rural area. He is wiping away his opponent in his reelection chances. Susan Collins has to run up the numbers in that area. And if the House member, a Democrat, is easily winning reelection there, that's bad news for her. So there's your map, 51-49. The Democrats flip seats in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, North Carolina, and Maine. Now, as we always do in our Senate election prediction videos, let's go through all the winners for you. We have Dan Sullivan defeating Al Gross. We have Jeff Merkley hanging on in Oregon. We have Jim Risch in Idaho. Mark Kelly in Arizona. Ben Ray Lujan in New Mexico. John Hickenlooper in Colorado. Mike Enzi in Wyoming. Steve Daines in Montana. Mike Rounds in South Dakota. Ben Sass in Nebraska, Roger Marshall in Kansas, Jim Inhofe in Oklahoma, and John Cornyn in Texas. In Minnesota, Tina Smith hangs on. Teresa Greenfield upsets Joni Ernst for the Democrats' third pickup. In Arkansas, Tom Cotton easily wins re-election, as does Bill Cassidy upon recovering from COVID-19. In Mississippi, Cindy Hyde-Smith holds off Mike Espy. Tommy Tuberville unseats Democrat Doug Jones. In Georgia, David Perdue holds on, and then we suspect it will be Doug Collins narrowly defeating Raphael Warnock. Lindsey Graham is going to outlast Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, whereas Bill Hagerty will win in Tennessee. Cal Cunningham will survive his troubles that we've seen over the last week and change and win in North Carolina and unseat Tom Tillis. Dick Durbin is going to win re-election in Illinois. Mitch McConnell will defeat Amy McGrath in Kentucky. Shelley Moore Capito will win in West Virginia, and Mark Warner will win in Virginia. Gary Peters will survive against John James in Michigan. And then on the East Coast, Chris Coons, Cory Booker, Jack Reed, and Ed Markey will win across the board here in Delaware, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And then in New Hampshire, a potentially competitive race about 6 or 8 months ago is going to be safe for Jeanne Shaheen against Kelly Ayotte. And then finally, Sarah Gideon will unseat longtime Republican Susan Collins. So there's your map, 51 for the Democrats, 49 for the Republicans. So thank you guys so much again for watching this video. By the way, stay tuned, okay? Starting at the 10-day mark, which is, of course, in 9 days. That is Saturday, a week from Saturday. We will be doing a presidential and Senate election prediction every single day over those 10 days. The reason we're doing that is because so much can change over that amount of time. And so we are going to break down each set of races every day for those last 10 days until Election Day. So definitely stay tuned. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Comment down in the suggestions below if you have any questions or anything you want to point out. Again, I'm doing this all extemporaneously without any information in front of me, so I can just communicate this information to you. So I may have missed something as I talked throughout this. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. And again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in November.